Bob Dylan walked past a homeless veteran's guitar case on a freezing New York night in 1982, and what he quietly slipped inside would ripple across decades. November wind tore through the Lower East Side, rattling loose newspaper against brick walls and carrying the smell of gasoline and stale rainwater down Avenue B. The city didn't slow down for anyone, especially not for the man sitting cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box outside a boarded-up pharmacy. His name was Daniel Harper, though nobody rushing past him knew that. To them, he was just another veteran in a worn army jacket with a frayed American flag patch stitched crookedly over the shoulder, another pair of tired eyes beneath a knit cap pulled low, another open guitar case on the sidewalk with a handful of coins glinting at the bottom. $2.14 and change. A photograph creased down the middle, a young woman holding a baby, both of them smiling at something outside the frame, and a piece of cardboard with thick black letters, Vietnam Vet. Just trying to stay warm. Daniel's fingers moved carefully across the strings of a scuffed acoustic guitar that had survived more rain than it should have, coaxing out a melody soft enough to get lost in traffic, but honest enough to cut through it. He wasn't performing for tips. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was playing because when he stopped playing, the silence got loud. 60 feet away, walking with his collar turned up and his hands shoved into the pockets of a dark coat, was Bob Dylan. He had just left a recording session downtown that hadn't gone the way he wanted. Too many voices in the control room. Too many opinions about what he should sound like now, what he used to sound like, what the audience expected him to be. He wanted air. He wanted distance. He wanted to disappear into the city that once made him. He wasn't looking for anyone. He certainly wasn't looking for a reminder. Then he heard the guitar. It wasn't polished. The tempo drifted slightly. One string buzzed on the fourth fret. But there was something in the way the man bent the notes, something in the restraint, like every chord had been earned the hard way. Dylan slowed his steps without meaning to. The song wasn't one of his hits. It wasn't even one of his songs. It was an old folk melody, the kind soldiers passed around overseas when radios went quiet and the night felt too long. Daniel didn't look up. He'd learned that eye contact usually meant pity or irritation. He kept his gaze on the frets, hands steady despite the cold stiffening his knuckles. People passed without stopping. A woman in heels stepped around the guitar case like it was a puddle. A man in a business suit dropped a dime without breaking stride. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly at something that had nothing to do with him. Dylan crossed the street. He stood there for a moment, just listening. The veteran's jaw was set, but not hard. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something invisible for too long. Dylan glanced at the cardboard sign, then at the photograph inside the case. He crouched slightly, enough to see the face in the picture more clearly. "You play that like you mean it," Dylan said quietly. Daniel's fingers faltered for half a beat before continuing. "Only way to play," he replied without looking up. His voice was rough, but not unfriendly. Dylan studied the guitar, cheap laminate body, repaired crack near the sound hole, mismatched tuning picks. The kind of instrument you don't replace because it's the only thing that stayed when everything else left. "You serve?" Dylan asked. Daniel nodded once. 68 to 70. Came back in one piece. At least that's what they said. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "World looked different when I got home. Or maybe I did." Dylan didn't respond right away. Taxi headlights flashed across both of them like a camera shutter. "You always play out here?" Dylan asked. "When the shelter's full," Daniel said. "When it ain't raining too hard. When my hands work." He paused, then added, "Better than talking." Dylan's eyes flicked to the guitar case again. $2.14. A life reduced to coins and a memory pressed between cardboard. "What's her name?" Dylan asked, nodding toward the photo. Daniel hesitated. That question had weight. "Laura," he said finally. "And that's my son. Haven't seen him in years. Figured they're better off remembering me different." He didn't say how many jobs he'd lost. He didn't say how the nightmares made it impossible to sleep inside four walls. He didn't say how the bottle helped until it didn't. He just kept playing. Dylan stood there longer than he meant to. People began glancing twice, some recognition flickering, but not landing. The city had seen stranger things than a famous musician standing beside a homeless vet. "Cold night," Dylan said. "They're all cold," Daniel replied. There was no complaint in it. Just fact. A bus roared past, wind whipping the edges of the cardboard sign. Dylan looked down one more time at the open case, at the coins, at the photograph that didn't belong in the gutter. Then he straightened up. "Keep playing," he said. Daniel gave a half shrug. "Don't know how to do much else." Dylan nodded once and turned away, disappearing into the moving crowd. Daniel didn't watch him go. People came and went. That was the rule. You don't build expectations out here. The melody continued, soft and stubborn against the noise of the city. 3 minutes passed. Then footsteps returned. Daniel noticed the shoes first, the same dark boots stopping just short of the case. He looked up this time. Dylan didn't speak. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply reached into his coat, pulled something out, and knelt down beside the open guitar case. For a brief second, their eyes met. Not celebrity and stranger, not success and failure, just two men who had both once come to New York with nothing but songs and stubbornness. Dylan slipped a small envelope beneath the photograph, tucking it gently so it wouldn't blow away. Then he stood. "Stay warm," he said quietly. And before Daniel could respond, before recognition could fully form, before the moment could turn into spectacle, Bob Dylan walked back into the night, leaving behind more than just paper in a guitar case on a freezing New York sidewalk. The envelope didn't look like much at first, just a pale rectangle tucked beneath the photograph in Daniel Harper's guitar case. But by the end of that night, it would divide his life into before and after. The wind sharpened as the man in the dark coat disappeared into the crowd, and Daniel kept playing for a few more minutes, partly from habit, partly because stopping meant thinking. Coins clinked once or twice into the case, but the cold was winning. When his fingers finally stiffened beyond comfort, he let the last chord fade and leaned forward to close the lid. That's when he saw it clearly. The envelope, cream-colored, his name written across the front in uneven ink, for Daniel. He froze. Out here, no one used his name. He was Buddy, or Sir, or nothing at all. Slowly, he picked it up and turned it over in his hands. Not sealed, just folded. He glanced up and down the sidewalk. Taxis, steam rising from a grate, laughter spilling from a bar, but no one was watching him. He opened it carefully. Cash. A thick fold of it. His breath caught. He counted once. Then again. It was more than he'd held at one time in years. Enough for weeks indoors. Enough to not measure life in coins. Suspicion flickered. People didn't do this, and then he saw the note. One sheet. Folded once. He opened it with trembling fingers. "You're not invisible. And you're not done. Take this and find somewhere warm. Then find somewhere to play. B." Daniel stared at the letter. Just one initial. But he knew that voice. He'd heard it through radio static in 1969, lying outside a tent in Vietnam while the sky pulsed in the distance. Sounds that made confusion feel understood. Bob Dylan. The realization settled slowly. The man who had crouched beside his case hadn't pitted him. He'd listened. Daniel replayed the moment. The quiet tone, the steady eyes, the absence of spectacle. He folded the note again, more carefully this time, and slid it back into the envelope. The old reflex whispered, "Find a bar, stretch the night, make the money vanish before it vanishes you." But the words interrupted the spiral. "You're not done." No one had said that to him in years. Not after the discharge. Not after the missed job interviews. Not after Laura stopped answering letters. The cold snapped him into motion. Instead of heading toward the alley where he sometimes slept, Daniel walked 3 blocks east to a rundown motel with a flickering vacancy sign. The clerk looked him over before sliding the registry forward. Daniel paid in cash. When the door to the small room shut behind him, the silence felt different from the street, contained. He stood under the shower longer than necessary, watching grime circle the drain. The hot water stung, but it meant he could still feel something. Later, sitting on the edge of the bed, he counted the money again. Still real. Still there. Enough not just to survive, but to choose. The next morning, instead of buying the cheap bottle that usually steadied his hands, he walked into a music store on Delancey Street. The bell above the door rang bright and clean. "New strings," he said, placing his guitar on the counter. Outside, seated on a crate, he replaced the old rusted wires one by one. When he strummed, the sound startled him. Clear. Full. Like the guitar had been waiting. He tuned carefully and played a slow progression. People turned their heads. Not out of pity, out of interest. 2 blocks away, something else caught his eye. A modest sign in a window he'd passed 100 times, Veterans Outreach Center, counseling, housing assistance, employment services. He stood across the street, arguing with himself. Pride said keep walking. Habit said you won't fit in there. But the note pressed against his chest from inside his jacket. Find somewhere to play. Maybe that didn't just mean a corner with better foot traffic. Maybe it meant a place where the war didn't have the last word. He crossed the street. Inside, the waiting room smelled like coffee instead of exhaust. A woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. Not tight or uncomfortable, just patient. Can I help you? She asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. He felt the weight of the envelope in his pocket. Not as money now, but as proof. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I'm ready to try something different. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like an empty case at his feet. 6 years later, Daniel Harper stood beneath warm stage lights in a small Brooklyn community theater, holding a guitar that stayed in tune, while an audience of veterans and families filled every folding chair in the room. The sign outside read, Harper and Friends, Songs for the Forgotten. It wasn't glamorous. No record executives. No flashing cameras. Just a modest stage, a simple microphone, and a man who once slept on cardboard outside a shuttered pharmacy. Daniel adjusted the mic, his hands steady now for reasons that had nothing to do with temperature. The army jacket was gone, replaced by a clean denim shirt, but the history in his eyes remained. I used to play on a corner, he began quietly. Thought nobody saw me. A murmur of understanding moved through the crowd. Turns out, he added, I was wrong. He never said the name publicly, never turned it into a headline. The story wasn't about celebrity. It was about interruption, the night someone stopped walking. After that winter evening, life hadn't magically repaired itself. There were counseling sessions at the Veterans Outreach Center. Paperwork. Nights when old memories returned louder than before. But there were also small victories. A maintenance job at a church. Weekly support meetings. A phone call to Laura that didn't end in silence. Then another call. Then coffee. The first time he saw his son again, the reunion was cautious. No dramatic embrace. Just two people trying to bridge lost years. Daniel didn't rush it. He kept showing up. Kept playing. Music became the language when apologies felt too small. What started as therapy turned into gatherings. A harmonica joined him one Tuesday night. Then a second guitar. Other veterans began bringing songs they'd written in notebooks no one had ever read. They called themselves Harper and Friends as a joke at first. Then someone suggested a public show. Daniel resisted. He wasn't looking for attention. But the note still lived in his jacket pocket, edges softened from being unfolded and refolded hundreds of times. You're not invisible. And you're not done. Find somewhere to play. So he agreed. Back on the stage, Daniel strummed a chord and let it ring out warm and full. Nothing like the thin metallic buzz of his old strings on that freezing sidewalk. This one's for anyone who thought their story ended early, he said. The melody was simple, honest, no theatrics. Halfway through, another veteran stepped up with a harmonica. A third voice joined on harmony. The audience leaned in, not because the music was perfect, but because it was real. When the final chord faded, the applause wasn't explosive, it was sustained. The kind that comes from recognition. Daniel stepped back, swallowing hard. In the front row, Laura sat beside their son. They weren't crying. They were listening. And that was enough. After the show, a younger veteran approached him near the stage steps. Early 20s. Restless eyes. How do you turn it around? He asked quietly. Daniel thought about the question. He could have said time. We're help. We're luck. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. The paper was creased, worn thin at the folds. He handed over the note. The young man read the words slowly. You're not invisible. And you're not done. Who wrote that? The young veteran asked. Daniel took the paper back carefully. Someone who stopped long enough to listen, he replied. Later, alone for a moment, Daniel opened his guitar case. The envelope was taped inside the lid, secured so it would never slip away again. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. He ran his fingers lightly over the paper, then closed the case. Outside, the city moved the way it always had, fast, loud, and different. But inside that small theater, men who once believed they were finished had stood in the light and been heard. And all because, on a freezing night in 1982, Bob Dylan had looked into a guitar case and left behind more than money. He left proof that being seen, even once, can be enough to begin again.